Resin jewelry and resin projects are popular today, and there are some gorgeous ones out there. Today I have for you a review of Art Resin. It's not only non-yellowing, but it has no VOCs that can harm your health. Hi there, Sandy here. Welcome to another Friday Findings video at keepsakecrafts.net. So the first time I ever used resin, I managed to pick up this one, which happens to be not only the most difficult one to measure and use properly, but it's also the stinkiest. I carefully followed the directions when I was using it. I had a window open and a fan on. I can't smell, but I clearly remember my husband coming in and saying, "Whew, that's strong." And after that initial project, which to this day is sticky, I never used it again. I've got this huge container. I should find a big project to do outdoors and use it up if it's still any good. So when the folks at Art Resin offered to send me an 8-ounce kit, I was really excited to try it because the only resin I had used after that initial foray with the nasty polyester resin was UV resin, which I love. It's super easy. But there are drawbacks to that. So this is the kit they sent me. You get a total of 8 ounces of resin, 4 ounces of resin, and 4 ounces of hardener. You get gloves. Wear the gloves, people. Really, wear the gloves. I don't care how neat you are, this stuff is sticky and messy and it gets everywhere, and when it cures, it's there forever. So wear the gloves. You get a mixing stick, which I found very handy. I use this throughout my projects that I made. And you get a spreader, which I didn't use in the least. If you go on the Art Resin website, a lot of what they're promoting and showing is using the resin to coat projects. Well, like this. This is their logo. And they had this in all sorts of different projects, painted and colored in different media, done in dried flowers. And their idea was to spread the art resin over top of the art piece to give it a shine and cover it and level it out and preserve it. But I was more interested in using it for casting. So those are the things you get in the kit. The resin and hardener, gloves, a spreader, and a little stirring stick. What else will you need? Well, you'll need some sort of cups to measure. So I have a few here. These are the ones that I measured individual portions out. And it's good practice to measure your portions. And they stress, measure this by volume. So you want 1 part of hardener to 1 part of resin by volume. So you measure that out. And then you pour both of them into a separate container. So I poured them into these large ones, which I think I got when I got that polyester resin long ago. I actually couldn't find these in the craft store anymore. But some sort of cup that you can measure in, stir in, mix your inclusions, and then you can wipe it out with a paper towel. And once that you get most of it out, I wipe these out thoroughly with rubbing alcohol. And so I can use these again. The other thing that they sent me, by the way, I meant to mention that, was their set of resin tints. And I had fun with these. It's a set of 8 pearlescent and metallic tints. And I'll talk more about these in a moment, but you get just these lovely pearly colors, and I really had a great time playing with a few of these, and I look forward to playing with them further. What else do you need? Well, for your work area, wax paper is what's recommended because it's inexpensive. You can crumple it up and throw away, but it does a good job of protecting your area. So anything that is in the area where you're working with resin, cover it with wax paper, the floor, your work surface. I also strongly suggest wearing an apron. One of the things I love about using the UV resin is that there's no measuring and no mixing. But there are benefits, like I said, to using this resin. You just have to measure and mix very accurately and very carefully. So you have to use cups with lines. You can buy in bulk, like little medicine cups, like the kind that come with bottles of cough syrup and such. You just measure very accurately, pour them into a separate container. The reasoning behind that is if you pour one of these into the other, it's likely that there's going to be something left behind in one of the cups, and then you won't have your 1-to-1 ratio anymore. So if you pour them both into a separate container, you scrape them out equally as well into that separate container, you should have exactly the same amount. The other thing is mixing. You have to mix thoroughly. Set a timer and just mix. One thing I didn't do was warm up my resin, and I had a lot of little bubbles, so you might want to just put it in a warm water bath to warm it up just a little, and they say that you'll get less bubbles. I'm going to test that out, and I'll put my results of that in the blog post to see if when I experiment with this, warming it up gives me less bubbles. Just follow the directions. It comes with a little instruction booklet that tells you exactly what to do. And that's right, they do have a lot of resources on their website. Like if you're covering an art piece, like I showed, it gives you a calculator to tell you just how much you will need. You have about 45 minutes of working time with this resin, so you do want to be sure that you have everything that you want to work with at hand and ready to go before you mix it. So what are the benefits of this type of resin versus UV resin? Well, let me show you an example. Here are a few pieces I made just in a silicone mold. A friend had given me these little mini dried hot peppers that I used. Now the resin underneath these hot peppers is completely cured. However, if I were to use UV resin and then say put this out in the sun to cure, the only part that would cure would be the part that was in the path of direct sunlight. So anything under those little peppers, or this part right here, would not cure. So whenever you use inclusions, you have to make sure that they don't obscure the resin, or it won't cure. Another thing about using UV resin is that it has to be open to the light. So if you have a dark colored mold, maybe one you made out of molding putty that's opaque, it's not going to work with UV resin. The cons about this would be that you have a much longer time to wait. If I were to use UV resin, I could put this in the sun, and once it was cured, it would be done in maybe 10-15 minutes. This stuff takes 24 hours to be hard to the touch, and then 72 hours to be fully cured. And if you don't measure and you don't mix accurately, it may never ever cure. Another thing that I have yet to test out, but I'm going to soon, and I'll have the results in a blog post. I did a video a few years ago that I called Nature's Treasures, where I preserved fresh flowers, not dried, but fresh, in the UV resin. Ultraviolet, by the way. It just means it cures in sunlight or under a UV light. A lot of people said that couldn't be done, but I did it, and I'm in checking these pieces several years later, they're still beautiful and fine. I think that's because the curing happens in a completely different way with UV resin than with this type of resin. I'm going to guess that with this type of resin, there's some kind of chemical reaction that may work on the moisture in those fresh flowers that would make it not work. I'll test that and I'll get back to you. So here are a few pieces I made with the Pearlescent. So what I did was I mixed up, I measured in these cups 1 ounce of resin and 1 ounce of hardener, poured the 2 ounces into here, stirred them thoroughly, and then I poured some of the resin back into the cups and added some of these tints. Now you'll notice this is separated already. You really have to spend quite a bit of time shaking it until that pearly stuff is all throughout the bottle. So take your time and take care with that so that you get your pearly sparkle. I didn't use every single color for my first test. I used this blue and a purple and bronze. And this one was kind of fun. One thing I found was that, move that out of the way so you can see it. It's got some really nice pearlescent sheen in there. I poured clear on one side, and it's viscous enough that you could do that. And then I poured some with the blue pearl tint mixed in on the other side, and then swirled them. And one of the things you can do is kind of keep in mind the longer it sits, the more viscous it gets. So although I had gotten nice swirls early on, they all just kind of mushed together. And the only way I got these few swirls in here that I did was I just used a toothpick to kind of place things. This is another great tool to use with resin because they're inexpensive. You can toss them. But I waited until it was much, much thicker, and then I was able to swirl it. This one, like I said, has the little peppers and just some bits of gold flakes in there. And I've seen some really beautiful resin jewelry done with the gold flakes. If I wanted to make something with this, you could see it's got a pretty strong surface tension here on the sides. So you might want to go back in with some more resin and fill it up to this edge. I don't know how well you can see it on the video, but there's quite a dip and a depression here. And it would also fill in those peppers a little bit more that are kind of exposed on the back. For this one, I used the blue tint. I happened to fill this like exactly right and didn't get that line that I've got here. And I mixed in just some little iridescent flakes. And by the way, these last three over here, I'll show you the other things I made with the resin in a moment, but these were actually, I was done, and then I started scraping the bottom of my cups. So make sure you have plenty of molds available so you can use all of the resin that you've mixed, because these are just all the leftover bits that were from the bottom of my cups, those last three little pieces. So this isn't all I made with 2 ounces of resin. This one's probably my absolute favorite. I used one of these molds, which I'll have a link to, and made this. I put some of the purple in, then some of the gold flakes, and that's where your toothpick comes in handy because you can kind of just poke it down in there. And then the blue on top of it, and I'm just thrilled with the way that came out. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but I can picture it being wire wrapped and being part of something magical. So for the remainder of the things I made with 2 ounces, if you're a regular and you watch my videos every week, you might consider supporting me on Patreon. It makes a huge difference and is a factor on whether or not this channel stays on YouTube. So many thanks to those of you who are already supporting me on Patreon. I so appreciate you all. You have no idea how encouraging it is to me. And don't forget that patrons have the opportunity to get up to 2 bonus tutorials every month. I made a ring using this ring mold. I seriously overfilled it, but sometimes you just have to do these experiments to know how these things work, especially how can you tell by looking at this just exactly what it is. So you can buy molds like this to make rings. And resin can be sanded, it can be buffed and drilled, but most of my 2 ounces of resin went into making this. This is a bangle bracelet, and I really love the way it came out, except that, of course, again, I overfilled it a little bit. I'm going to have to do some sanding and buffing. I just layered in the resin that I had mixed with some of the purple and some of the bronze. So you can really have a lot of fun playing with different colors. I absolutely love the pearly tints, and I plan to do more with them. This resin was created by artists for artists who felt that artists shouldn't have to risk their health while using resin. It has no VOCs, which are volatile organic compounds, which can damage your liver, damage your lungs. So there's no need to wear a respirator when you're using this. In fact, I asked my husband, like I said, I can't smell, so I asked him because he has a really acute sense of smell. And he said it was just like a faint plasticky smell, but nothing offensive. So I feel good knowing that I can use this and not be compromising my health and not be putting bad things into the air for not just myself, but my loved ones and my pets. I'm really pleased with this. I love the clarity of it. This is all cured beautifully. Although it is hard to the touch after 24 hours, it's not fully cured until 72 hours. I started to pull this ring out of the mold about 24 hours after pouring it, and it was hard to the touch, but this thin part, well, it's still, you can see, it's kind of flexy. It's only been about 36 hours since I poured this, so you can see that it's not fully hardened. So keep that in mind. You do have to allow for that amount of time for it to cure, and you have to allow for a bit of time for some sanding and buffing or re-pouring another layer on the back. All in all, though, I really enjoyed working with this, and I've got some ideas for future projects, which I will share with you. Thank you very much to the nice folks at Art Resin for sending along this resin for me to try. I'm ready to go out and buy a gallon and really have some fun playing with it, experimenting with different kinds of inclusions, because unlike the UV resin, I can put anything in it and know that it's going to cure. If you're interested in any of these supplies, be sure to click on the little eye in the upper right or look in the description box for a link to my blog post where I will have links to everything I showed you here on the video.